Hey, what's up? It's 2. The last poll was either between Morgan or Yang Gibi, and my patrons voted for the latter, so here's a guide on how to play the blonde girl from Ruby who punches people, I think, Yang. Yang Yuhan is a 5-star foreigner introduced to the game as the 2020 New Year's servant for JP and 2022 for NA. She's a single target arts DPS whose game plan is to put burn on enemies by slamming them with their musical instruments and then use her noble phantasm on them for super effective damage by throwing an entire fucking star at them. At level 90, she's got 13,365 HP and 12,342 attack. She has 0.51% MP charge on attack, she's chaotic good, and her notable traits are divinity and threat to humanity. For some reason, she's also weak to Enema Elish, even though she throws literal stars at people, but I'm assuming that applies because of her musical instruments, I guess. Lastly, she's got a 2Q2A deck that has 4-hit quicks, 4-hit arts, a 1-hit buster, and a 4-hit extra. Before its buff, Yang's first skill granted herself a 1-turn invul, charged her own MP gauge by 10% flat every turn for 3 turns, produced 5 to 15 stars, and had a 500% chance to taunt all male enemies by 300% for 1 turn on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Post buff, this skill now produces 10 more stars, so 15 to 25 stars instead, and removes the gender restriction on her taunt because it's 2023 and Twitter would be fucking pissed that Yang couldn't also taunt the ladies too, which, to be fair, having watched as many VTubers as I have, I'm sure she could. Her second skill drains 1 tick of MP charge from all enemies, charges her own MP gauge based on how many enemies she was able to drain by 10 to 20% per enemy, and then reduces their defense by 10 to 20% for 3 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. So to clarify, Yang will not charge her MP gauge if she uses this skill on an enemy with an empty gauge of their own, or in other words, if they have no MP charge of their own, but she will still put her defense debuff on them. Her third skill gives herself the Living Flame buff for 3 attacks 3 turns, which reduces the defense of any enemy by 10% for 3 turns if they attack Yang while it's active, and puts a burn DOT on them for 3 turns that does 500 to 1000 burn damage to them every turn. It also increases her own defense by 10 to 20% as an independent buff separate from her Living Flame buff for 3 turns, all on an 8 to 6 turn CD. Her passives give her 2 crit stars every turn, increase her debuff resist by 12%, and increases her damage by a flat 175, and her third append damage bonus is Anti-Ruler. Her Noble Phantasm is single target arts that deals damage to one enemy, then puts a massive burn DOT on them that does 3000 to 6000 damage every turn for 3 turns, depending on MP level. And it deals super effective damage if its target already has a burn DOT, and it can be any burn, not just from her own NP. Yang Yuhan is a near universal arts DPS mainly thanks to 2 reasons: her foreigner class and her NP's super effective damage against burn targets. Because she's a foreigner, she'll be doing neutral damage to almost every class and double damage to Zerks, pretenders, playable beasts, and other foreigners. This means that foreigners are perhaps the most privileged class in FGO because they effectively have 3 classes that they win against, 1 class that's basically a downtown London knife fight, which is against themselves, and only 1 class that they lose to, which is normal. And while yes, a lot of their true class advantage situations are against other extra class servants, so they won't come up as often, you will be fighting berserkers often enough, and they're still annoying enough where having a class that straight up beats them is worth investing into a single target foreigner for. And let's not forget her third append skill that gives her at least a partial advantage against rulers just because. As for Yang's anti-burn super effective damage, remember that in FGO, super effective damage scaling usually has a condition that must be fulfilled before a servant can deal that kind of damage, and typically they're based on traits. Maeve's and Tamalance's anti-cock damage, Gil's Enema Elish damage, everyone with an anti-divine modifier like Napoleon, Karna, and Avenger Nobu, among others, Morgan's anti-man, Archetype Earth's anti-chaotic, etc. What sets Yang apart is that her super effective condition isn't based off a trait like most others are, which usually means it relies on enemies having that trait in the first place, or another way to put it is that they're things that you can't put on them if they don't have it already, which then means if they don't have them, there's no point in bringing that servant to fight against them. But for Yang, her super effective damage is based off a debuff, specifically a DOT, which means that you can put it on enemies, and as long as you can slap them with burns, Yang can nuke the fuck out of whoever you want her to. Truly the equal opportunity nuker like her first skill buff suggests that she is. Note that her super effective damage doesn't scale off the number of burns an enemy has, however. She's not going to do more damage just because they physically have more burn DOTs on them. As long as they have at least one active burn DOT on them when Yang uses her MP on them, they're getting their ass Chernobyl. Because enemies obviously don't start fights already burned unless it's like a special story fight or something, Yang's goal is to put burns on them first before using her NP. And remember that while her NP does have a burn of its own, it specifically applies it after it deals damage, so it makes it that much more important that you somehow burn her target first. She does have a second way of burning enemies, that being the Living Flame buff on her S3, but it relies on you getting the right enemy targeting RNG where they hit Yang with her S3 buff active. Sure, you can guarantee that they hit her using the taunt on her S1, but not only does this require you to wait for an enemy turn first to use her NP, but since both her S1 and S3 have 6 turn cooldowns, there will be a gap where the burns expire on their own, and that might be a turn where you have Yang's NP ready to go, but you don't want to use it yet since all the burns are gone. This means that Yang has a very clear preference for command codes, and luckily for her, there are quite a few burn CCs in the game. So if you have any, doesn't matter what rarity they are, and you plan on using Yang seriously, give your burn CCs to her face cards first and foremost. Because with them, Yang has a free and potentially instant way of burning enemies that doesn't rely on her using her skills or MP, which then means that Yang can use her S1, S3 combo to specifically protect her teammates instead. She can insta NP by leading off with a face card that has a burn CC to apply burn first and then nuke her target, and she can apply burns on a regular basis so that her target always has one that she can blow up. Another thing to keep in mind regarding Yang's gameplay is that thanks to her S2 and the fact that she's arts, she can potentially loop her nuke damage, and of course the more enemies she's up against, the better. This is easiest to do at the start of a fight since typically she'll have most, if not all, the buffs that she needs to deal massive nuke damage right off the bat, and so if the situation is right, she can blow the fuck out of someone 2 turns in a row. Wait a minute. And lastly, Yang can also function as an arts crit DPS if you prefer. Her S1 produces stars directly, her deck has 2 quick cards along with the 4-hit extra, and her foreigner class gives her higher than average star weight. This also perfectly synergizes with her multi-nuke damage potential, and so you can adjust her craft essences, command codes, and art support teammates accordingly, especially now that we have servants like Lady Avalon and Johanna over on JP. So there's a whole spectrum that Yang has where she can focus more on MP damage or more on crit damage depending on what you want her to do, which means that she's quite accommodating even for free-to-play or Dolphin players since you can supplement her low MP level with crit damage instead. However, Yang does have a number of issues that you need to address while playing her. She does not have a 5-turn CD skill. They're all 6-turn CDs or higher, and so she relies heavily on Tamamo to help get her skills back. Oh, what's that? You didn't level your Tamamo because you thought Castoria was going to replace her, and you thought Yang had a skill issue, huh? She also doesn't have a single damage buff for herself either. Technically she has one, but it's the defense debuff on her S2, and that happens to be the skill with the longest cooldown at 7 turns. Not only that, but because she has super effective damage off her NP, she absolutely needs regular buffs to make her NP nuke as hard as it can because of multiplicative buff stacking, and so she's even more reliant on her teammates for damage output than a lot of other arts DPSs out there. And, just a minor gripe here, but it's also unfortunate that Yang's taunt also has her invul, because this means that it's a little awkward whenever you want to use Castoria's arts buff and Yang's invul skills on the same turn. Thankfully though, all of her issues are problems that you can work around with the right teammates and just by playing smart. It'll just take a few fights for you to get used to how she plays. Hell, even against enemies who have high debuff resist, Yang can still work if you can stack all of her face cards with burn CCs, since one of those burns are going to land eventually, and remember, she only needs one to nuke the crap out of them. For craft essence choices, if you have a high MP level Yang or you prefer nuking people with just her NP, go for the MP damage CEs like Black Grail and Heaven's Feel. Just remember that since Yang has pretty low HP for a 5-star, she will be feeling Black Grail's health demerit a little more, so make sure to keep her healthy. If you've got a low MP level Yang or you prefer watching her crit the fuck out of people by smashing her flute into their faces, then take crit damage damage CEs like Another Ending, Hot Sands, Hot Spring of the Moon that also produces more stars every turn that synergizes a bit with their Foreigner passive, Summertime Mistress, Glory is With Me, or the classic Holy Night Dinner. And of course, let's not forget Honey Lake, and daily reminder that it's drawn by my Oshi's mom, Rurudo, so Jesus Christ, talk about a must-roll CE for me. This is a great CE for Young since you'll run into enemies who use invul skills a lot during challenge quests, and the anti-burn damage is a power mod, so it'll be like a permanent MP damage bonus as long as you can keep burning your target. Also, something interesting that I found in Honey Lake's comment section on the wiki of all places that I didn't think of is that apparently Honey Lake synergizes perfectly with face cards with burn CCs since they put burn on enemies before the game calculates their damage, so they'll also be doing the 40% extra damage against burned enemies. So assuming this is true, then that's all the more reason to use Honey Lake, especially if you happen to have a copy of this, but not Black Rail or Heaven's Feel yet, somehow. If Young were a Star Rail character, then Honey Lake would definitely be her signature Light Cone that you have to pull from Light Cone Gacha. Her own Max Bond CE increases her MP damage by 30% and gives her face cards the ability to put Spread of Fire debuffs onto enemies for 3 turns that increases the burn damage they take by 20%. I kinda would've preferred if this gave Young the ability to burn enemies just by normal attacking, so that way she doesn't need to rely on command codes to do so, but at the end of the day, it's just a Max Bond CE, so you're still better off with Gacha or Event Craft Essences. So in summary, Young is a strong, versatile arts DPS who has a universal super effective damage condition that only requires enemies to have a burn DOT. She just needs to find a way to put burn on them first before she blasts them with her NP, and she can easily branch into an arts crit DPS role instead if that's what you prefer or need. Make sure she doesn't run into Summer BB in the cafeteria, otherwise they're gonna punch a hole through the fucking planet, and give her lots of lychee ice cream and soju. And remember, she goes from nice to meet you in her first 2 ascensions straight to your son calls me mommy too in her 3rd. And just for the record, you are the son and she is the mommy, especially when you know what her kink is. The poll for the next FGO how-to will be up on my Patreon once this video is live like usual, so if you're interested in voting in it, go check it out. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also follow me over on Twitch for gacha streams at twitch.tv/ToaSniper98. Thanks for watching, peace.